My name is Annika Seth, and I am a First Chesapeake FTC and FRC alumni, as well as an alumni ambassador sponsored by Booz Allen Hamilton. I'm here to introduce today's First Chesapeake Chat. I want to first thank this session's sponsor, Newport News Shipbuilding, for making this chat possible. We'll do some housekeeping first, and then we'll let the speakers present and then open up for discussion questions later on if there's time. Please put questions in the comment section throughout the session, and we'll get to them all after our speakers conclude with their presentations. First, as a quick reminder, the volunteer registration system is now open for FTC volunteers with our next hybrid event of the season this weekend. We again have remote roles available, like judging, making it possible to support our STEM community from afar. Please visit our volunteer webpage at www.firstchesapeake.org/volunteer for instructions and links to register. On that note, let's get started. Today, we're going to learn about scouting from three mentors from FRC Team 449, the Blair Robot Project. We have Dr. Daniel Peterson, aka Flag Dad, who is also an MRA, Maryland Robotics Alliance facilitator, Caitlin King, and Yoni Peterson, who are both first alumni. Thank you to all three of you for being here today, and we'll start with y'all each telling us a little bit about yourselves and then getting into your presentation. And we can start with you, Dr. Peterson, if that's okay.
Hi, Annika. It's so great to see you. Welcome, everyone, to learn about Scouting 2022. Let's have the next slide, please. So I'm a mentor for Team 449. I'm on the MRA board. I'm now a high school chemistry teacher, thanks in large part to my experience in FIRST. Caitlin.
Hey, yeah. So I've been involved in FIRST for about 10 years now, actually. I started as a student on Team 3663 out in Seattle. And then when I moved out here for grad school, I found a team out here, found 449, and have been a scouting mentor for them since 2017.
And I'm Yoni. I've graduated from 449 in 2016, and I've been mentoring the team since then. You probably have seen me on the field in a zebra shirt. I ref the northern route often.
Hi, so what we're going to cover today is scouting, which is all about collecting objective data on what robots can do. So I'll have a brief introduction to Team 449, which will give us the context for what we tell you about scouting. We'll cover what problems we face at competition that scouting can help with. We'll talk about what is scouting, which is, very briefly, quantitative and qualitative data about individual robot performance throughout the event. It's analyzed and it's used to develop match strategy and alliance selection. Why do we scout? How do we use it? And how does it solve our problems? Then we'll focus in on the challenges for 2022, which are mostly, there'll be no in-person spectators who can actually do the scouting and generate data in person. Have to rely on video streaming, and there's only one day for competition, so not a lot of time to turn around the data. And we'll talk how we're planning to get ready for the 2022 season. So very briefly, Team 449 is a high school team closely associated with a STEM magnet program. It's student-led and mentor-guided, and we host the BunnyBots preseason event for the FIRST community to promote rookie involvement. So here's the key that we've gone over the past few years, made many improvements, and we've increased our success every year over the past 5 years, especially better achievements in competition and winning awards. And scouting is a huge, huge part of this. And we'll learn a little bit later about how it turned our district championship performance from being ranked dead last 50 out of 50 teams after 2 matches that we could not move to a finalist alliance. And scouting was key, and without the scouting, we would not have been able to do that. So scouting allows us to understand the game better, prepare strategy for each match that we play, prepare for alliance selection, and to build relationships with other teams. So I will quickly cover problems that we can address using scouting. Caitlin will fill in, and then they will continue with more details about what scouting is and how we do it. So basically, the problem that we're facing is we all want to know, what are robots capable of? What are your opponents capable of? What are your alliance partners capable of? So you can plan how to work in a match. One of the main problems is so people will try to use the official match rankings to evaluate how well a robot performs, but they are affected by random factors and don't give reliable info about actual capabilities. We were in a competition where there's a robot that moved off the line in auto, wandered a little bit around, and then did some ineffectual defense, and then went and climbed. And they were ranked higher than we were when we were doing multiple cycles and scoring, and we had a very reliable high climb and scored a lot of points. So in that competition, they were ranked above us, mostly because of the random draw of being on more winning alliances than we were. So sophisticated teams will know that the official match rankings don't work very well to tell you about how actual robots work. And they also don't tell you time about specific things you need to know. You can also go around do pit scouting, collect info from teams, and they will tell you about the robot and how much it can score and what it can do. But that's usually unreliable because it's either exaggerated or overly hopeful or unrealistic. Pit scouting is valuable for building relationships, for lobbying, and finding out which teams need help so we can all do our gracious professionalism and help out those teams that need it. Problems for choosing an alliance. How do you choose the most compatible team? You want to choose a team, but someone else selects them and your selection changes very quickly. How do you keep on top of that? And finally, if you want other teams to pick you, how do you convince them, especially have a low ranking, and how do you prove to them that you can do what you think you can do? So I'll turn it over to our experts. Yoni was a drive team coach involved in planning match strategy and talking to alliance partners. And Caitlin is our scouting king. Caitlin King, our scouting king, and she runs the show. So go ahead, take it away, Caitlin.
All righty, thank you. So these are some of the fields that we're planning on capturing this year for scouting. You can see I've kind of broken them into 3 different categories. The quantitative ones are the objective. What is the robot doing? Did it shoot? Did it miss? Did it climb? Did it fail? Was defense attempted, right? These are the things that you can grab someone and say, what did the robot do? How many? Yes, no, things like that. The calculated fields are, the ones that you can have a computer do, which is key if you're trying to do a competition, especially in one day, right? You want the computer to do as much as it can for you. And then the qualitative is actually very, very important, but that one you do want to have separate from your quantitative. Typically, you want, a separate qualitative scouter who's just kind of watching the field and getting a sense for it. So was the robot fast? Was it maneuverable? Was it a fast climber? Was it stable? Right? Things like that. A couple of things, you guys can go through these slides later if you want, but a couple of things to note is you can see the fouls, climb time, and cycle time are all on there and crossed out. Those I wanted to draw attention to because those are fields that people always think that they want there, and you really don't. Either they're too subjective, like climb time, right? If you have a random scouter that you've grabbed from, deep on your team, they've never been to an event before, and you say, hey, how long does this robot take to climb? When does the timer start? Is it when the robot drives over? Is it when they start lining up? Is it when they extend the climber, their wheels get off? When does it end, right? Is it at the end of the match? It's a ton of extra work for your scouter, and you're not going to get that good data off of it, and inaccurate data is absolutely worthless to you. So things like that. Also cycle time. There's so many different factors in there, right? Maybe they weren't going for that extra cycle, right? Maybe they started and then ended up doing something else. And you're going to end up with a number that doesn't mean a lot. So the big thing when you're coming up with the fields that you're scouting is to not overtax your system, right? Less is more most of the time. Having all of this data is only useful if you can process it and actually use it.
And speaking of using the data, here are some of the ways we like to visualize our data, both to ourselves and for posting, as some of you who have been at events with 449 may have seen around the field. So one, the classic stacked bar graph for the average points per match, which is split up between usually auto, teleop, and climb, which are usually the 3 big scoring things that you can kind of compartmentalize. This is useful to in one place, see the strength of the teams and where their strength comes from. so that you can you can anticipate what they'll do and work around it in any way you like, whether you want a strong climber or a strong teleop bot, or what you can do with each of them varies. And then here are the other two, one of which is a binary success or failure. It gives you at a glance the number of times they've even tried and then how well they're doing at it. And this, usually very useful for climbs, as you can see here. And right below it is using the color grading to kind of have two axes on a one-axis graph. So in this case, it's climb time per team, where the darkness of the color is how often they would climb that well. And so using this graph, you can tell that the fastest team is also the most consistent at being fast. And the next fastest team, in this case 1086, is really fast, but maybe this was a one-time thing. And you might want to keep an eye on that for the future.
Yes, and one thing on the climb time, I know 2 slides ago I said don't do that. Honestly, it's cost and reward. So the cost for this graph, right, is very, very high. It's a lot of stress on the scouters. They're always trying to figure out, when that time starts, when it ends, right? Maybe they count differently, right? Maybe they count too fast, things like that. And in the end, we get a graph that looks like this, which is helpful, but who knows how accurate this data really is. Really, we're just trying to get a feel out of it, which can be done from a qualitative scouter looking at that same robot and going, that was a fast climb. And it's much more effective to get things like this that way versus, trying to have all of your quantitative scouters do something like this and then end up with a graph that may or may not be helpful to you. So then we get into the strategy, which is what you get when you actually use your scouting data. So scouting data is, known for alliance selection, right? It's, finding the teams that are going to work with you well for alliance selection, but there's also all of the other matches that you can use this data for, right? You can look at these teams and, who knows what their ranks are. They could be anything, right? And that doesn't necessarily correspond to how good the team is. So having your data can help you've got the superstar, stay out of their way, right? Let them do everything they can do to the best of their ability, and then take your defensive robot and, for sure, let him work on the other superstar on the other team, right? And don't worry about totally following that superstar the whole time. If they're very maneuverable, maybe you just have your defensive robot guard where they're going to be shooting from, right? That's way more efficient. You can, use your resources as well as possible and things like that, which are very useful from the scouting perspective. The other thing is with alliance selection. So, when you're the number 1 or number 2 team, chances are your first pick is going to be easy, right? There's very often a few superstars. They're very easy to pick out and you're good to go. The bigger thing is when you get lower down in the pack and you get to everyone else who's, in the 20s, in the 30s, I guess, this year it's going to be smaller, but you get all those other teams who are kind of about the same at first glance, right? Is rank 24 that much better than rank 29? Maybe a little bit, perhaps, not necessarily. So with alliance selection and applying the scouting to that, you can find those superstars who just had bad luck, right? We at District Champs, as Daniel alluded to, we were actually 58th out of 58. There were more teams than 50. We never made it to 50. We eventually crawled our way up to 52nd because we had 2 dead matches on the first day where we did not move. And then finally on our 3rd match, we moved and immediately got a gear stuck. And that was it. And then we climbed. That was a good one thing that we did that match. But we were able to take all of this scouting data that we had from the 2nd day where we did so well, but we just kept losing, right? It was bad luck. Our superstar partner happened to break that match, whatever. We just kept losing. Eventually we did win a match and we were still in 58th. But we were able to take all this data that showed that we were really good and go to, the top tier teams and say, hey, here is our data. We are really good. Also, if you disregard that first, those first 2 matches, it was a weird problem. It will not happen again, right? You can look at all of our other data that will reflect how we're going to do in elims. You should pick us. And iLight did pick us and we made it to finals that match or that event, and that got us to Worlds for the first time. On the other hand, if we are then trying to pick and find that diamond in the rough, we have all these different graphs that can help us find, these teams that are way, way lower than they should be and pick them out and, work with them really well. So if we go to our beautiful scatter plot, the scatter plots are the holy grail of our graphs. They're much more complex. They're, much more difficult to post because you can't really just get a good sense of it right from looking at it. But scatter plots are great partly because you can get 3 to 4 metrics on there pretty easily, right? You've got your X, you've got your Y, you have the shade of the bubble, and then sometimes you also have the size. So this graph in particular was from our first event in 2017 at Whitman. We had been picked for an alliance, and then we were, going through the rest of alliance selection to pick our next, our final robot. And we were watching all these teams get picked. So you can see 1885 there at the very top. They were very good at gears. They were solid at climbs. They had very good auto, right? 4242, 614, very good at climbing, solid gears, right? We were a little bit lower, some gears, very good at climbing, a little bit of auto, right? And we were watching all these other teams get picked, and more went, and 1727 wasn't getting picked. And we just kind of kept watching, and more teams kept going. They were the obvious next solution, and more teams kept getting picked, oftentimes really low teams on our graph here, right? Not very good climbers, not very good gear delivers. And it was obvious to us that we should pick 1727, but it wasn't obvious to anyone else because they didn't have this data, right? They were ranked 28th, so everyone totally overlooked them. And it didn't even dawn on them that there's a really good team here and no one's paying attention. So we were able to pick them. They did amazing for us and they were fantastic partners. And that's all because we had all that scouting data, which was huge.
And then to bring it back to the present and to the future, we're going to start a discussion really soon, but some of our challenges for 2022 that change how we're doing things is that there's only one day. And that's really tough when you're used to having an entire evening to discuss your strategy for alliance selection. That just can't happen. So instead, we're going to have to figure out how we can do this, streamline as much of the discussion as we can during lunch or during matches to maximize our effectiveness for the rest of the day and during playoffs. Yeah, if you have, okay, sorry. And another thing is that unlike in normal FRC events, chances are we won't have in person, like your team can't spectate in person, so you will have to figure out a solution for these online events, online streams. I've been told that both venues will have their own dedicated stream with a static camera that won't move, which will be extremely helpful for video scouting because it means that you know what you can see. And one thing that we're going to do is, or a bunch of things we're going to do, really culminate in dry running our scouting system in the events before ours, either online or offline, to make sure that we have as much down as we can before our actual event. But yeah, if you have any questions, put them in the chat. Otherwise, do you have any other? No?
Well,
okay.
Thank you all so much. I think while we're waiting for some audience members to put in their questions, I have some questions that I'd love to know the answers to. For audience members, I was on 449 myself and I did scouting. So this is really fun to be able to hear about the new process for this year. And I guess one of the questions that I have is I think that late night deliberation and analysis was both really fun, but also really helpful. And also really fun. So I guess, what advice do you have more tangibly for teams to try and supplement that over the course of their one day at tournament? Where should they do that and how should they manage that time?
Yeah, so I think this year, right, we're going to need much more of our whole setup ready beforehand, right? It's fully possible to get Tableau, the data visualization software, fully set up and ready to go prior to the competition, right? We can have all the graphs pre-made. We can just be waiting for that data dump. So that means that, once we get our first few matches in, we can load that all in and immediately start getting graphs, versus what we often end up doing is, we start them, 10, 15 matches in or so and kind of see what they look like. There's a lot of extra prep work that we can do beforehand in order to really streamline that. We are going to have to do an equivalent of our entire 5-hour scouting meeting over lunch halfway through matches, which is sure going to be something. I haven't totally figured out how we're doing that yet. I think the big thing is having as much data as we can, again, streamlined already in the graphs, things like that, and then kind of start making our list, for alliance selections and things like that right around then, and then kind of adapt it as we go through more. We're for sure going to trial run this the week before, though, right? We're going to pick a team at a different event, pretend that we're them, and then try and do a whole practice run, because that has always been huge. We've always gone to a week 1 event. We typically compete in week 2. We always, bring a dozen of us to a week 1 event and just do a ton of scouting. And then our scouting that we did at that event looks almost nothing like what we end up doing at the week after, because we learned so many things. So there's going to be a lot to learn from that first week, and, figure out how to kind of condense everything in as quickly as possible.
Thank you. That's super helpful. We have a question here in chat as to how will 449 plan to utilize this stream with students at the event or away?
Yeah, so, in our prime, I've got, 10 kind of scouting leadership, right? Those are my data analysts, match strategists, the leads, right? The app manager. So I've got 10 of those, in addition to, our 6 or 7 quantitative scouters who each get a robot and each, watch that robot the entire match and take notes. That's 16 people out of, I think, the max of 25 if cases are near 0 that we're allowed to have at an event, which means we're almost definitely going to be, off-site for sure, either in our own homes and just on one big video call, right? We all get a robot that we watch. Right, we kind of do our jobs fully remotely and then call in to someone with good cell service. Or, if cases are low enough, we're all in someone's house. But for sure, we're not going to be at the event. If, the team is allowed enough members there, maybe we get one scouting representative, right, who kind of runs the show there. And then the rest of us are fully remote. But it's going to be quite an effort. It's going to be a big day, and we're going to have a lot of pieces to figure out before then.
Yeah, I definitely think that the virtual component will make it a little bit more challenging to liaison with team members who are on site, especially because cell service is often pretty abysmal
Yes.
At tournaments. So
Yes.
that's a very good point.
Yeah.
I'm also interested in the app specifically. How does the app development process work for 449?
Yoni, I think you've got this one.
Yeah, so we've had one of our alums, when they were on the team, developed a system with a server that ran on a computer that would connect over Bluetooth to Amazon Fire Kindles that we develop apps for that we could have. Mostly that was for our quantitative scouts to input data that would sync over Bluetooth to the computer, which would then give it to Tableau and we could do things with it. So the project is open source. I believe it should be on the Blair Robot project on GitHub. If not, you can ask on the Chesapeake Discord or email blairrobot at gmail.com, and someone will get you in the area. But for this year specifically, chances are you'll be doing just fine with Google Sheets. Setting up like just a form, Google Forms, and processing it through Google Sheets. Because if you're doing it from home, you can control the internet connection. So unlike an event where usually they tell us to turn Wi-Fi off. So this year specifically, we're going to see, but our backup is usually paper. In this case, our backup is going to be just using Google Forms, because it's going to be easy and reliable.
Well, I'm going to give a call back to the 20th century, and I think it was the last 2 seasons where we had app input, but we did a lot on paper forms, and then we would hand those paper forms to 2 or 3 students who were sitting in the back, and they would do data entry.
The true heroes.
The true heroes. So you do not need an app in order to do quality scouting.
No, you absolutely
And
do not.
And
if you're
every
going-
single one of our events, even when we have the app, there's always a chance it'll break.
Yep.
We always have paper backups for our scouting data so that we
Mhm.
can make sure that we can get our scouting data into a computer and processed and handled. And paper is not that bad. A working scouting up is just a little bit nicer.
Yeah.
Do we have time for a very short question, Annika, that I can ask our
We can do one,
experts?
yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
What advice do you have to someone who wants to start or a scouting system or take a beginning scouting system to the next level?
Yeah, so go ahead and reach out to Blair if you want. We're happy to help. We love spreading scouting. If you want to do it fully on your own, I would recommend for sure starting with paper. Don't try anything electronic except for maybe Google Forms. Do test runs for sure, right? Find off-season events, find something, right? And do, your test runs, figure out what data is actually helpful to you and minimize everything else. Those are kind of some of the easiest ones. Make it as user-friendly as possible and figure out what data is directly useful. Because if you get a whole ton of data and you can only look at 3 fields, the rest of it was not worth your time. And you can get a ton from not that much, and you can make these huge major changes. You can do different strategy, you can find different, alliance partners with not too much effort. It's definitely effort, don't get me wrong, but just stay small, don't start huge is my big thing.
Yeah, our 16-person scouting team may sound daunting, but
It's
with
wild.
a handful of qualitative scouts, you can get most of the way there.
Mhm.
And then if you have the manpower to do quantitative, that's also great.
Yeah.
And I think an overlooked power of the scouting team, a lot of people talk about alliance selection, but really I think the magic happens when you come to a match.
Yeah.
To know what to expect and how to play well. And
Mhm.
Yoni was telling me that you can predict approximately what the score would be based on past performance of this combination of robots. And then what can you do in order to tilt that in your favor?
Yes.
If someone does a lot of shooting, then get in their face for shooting. If so things like that, or if one robot does only one thing really well, then your superstar robot can focus on the other thing.
Mhm.
So thinking through this and coming to each match with a strategy for playing well in that match, I think that's even more important than, arguably more important than alliance selection.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you all so much for all of that advice. I also think that what you mentioned earlier about a Google Form and Google Sheets being a really great start is really good for accessibility. I think Tableau is great, but can be a pretty steep learning curve. So thank you very much for that note. So just on that, thank you all so much for your valuable insight on scouting. And I want to again thank our first Chesapeake Chat sponsor, Newport News Shipbuilding, for the generous support of this program and of our 2022 Chesapeake District Championship. So please enjoy the short video about Newport News, and we'll see you all next time.
Bye, everyone.